Well, we have breaking news. A source tells CNN that a top Ukrainian pilot has been killed while flying a U.S.-made F-16 fighter jet. It was one of the first F-16s delivered to Ukraine after its president pleaded with the West for the military aid. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh joins us now. Nick, what more do we know about the crash and kind of the broader implications?
Yeah, let's start with what we know about the crash. Now, we're being told by a Ukrainian defense official that this occurred during the F-16 and its pilot, Alexei Mess, by the call sign Moonfish, were repelling one of the largest Russian assaults on Ukraine that we've seen in the past years, frankly, that occurred earlier on this week. Over 400 projectiles fired this week at Ukraine, a sort of Moscow's retribution for its losses on the border. The F-16 involved, this defense official says, in repelling that attack. And we heard from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said somewhat cryptically that F-16s had been used to try and stem some of the missile attacks earlier this week. The defense official refers to a crash, and so there will be discussion as to exactly whether this was a technical problem caused by a role in combat or the plane shot out of the sky as it flew over Ukraine. But remember, this is one of 6 that have arrived in Ukraine already. The pilots, perhaps trained at such a compressed rate, maybe even more a valuable resource potentially than the jets themselves, 80 of which have been promised by European allies to Ukraine. The Biden administration had to sign off on this because these planes are US made, and it could potentially, when they arrive in mass, be a bit of a game changer for Ukraine, who's suffered from a lack of air superiority for the past years. They have limited jets and helicopters, but it's the Russians who have enough jets to bomb Ukrainian positions at will. That's been a huge problem for Ukrainian forces across the front line. The F-16s may have been able to change that, but here we have a piece of news which I think military analysts will say is not entirely surprising. If you put pilots in a compressed training regimen into some of the most complex combat scenarios seen over Europe for decades, and then of course rush into the field as well, these F-16 jets with a maintenance regime that must be so complex given the environment they're functioning in. So a key moment certainly for Ukraine, the F-16 in combat, defending its skies, but now enduring a loss as well. There will be questions as to what this means for the technical viability going forwards, but it is a startling moment, and I think the loss of this pilot, known as Moonfish, Alexei Mess, felt keenly by many Ukrainians. A very experienced man, chosen for this particular role. He went to the US to advocate for the F-16s being delivered, and now meeting his death, it seems, while defending Ukraine. Phil?
Yeah, you mentioned the moment, that moment also coming in the backdrop of another round of Russian air attacks overnight. Ukrainian officials calling them massive. What more do we know?
Yeah, look, 60 drones shot down, 2 missiles shot down, but 3 missiles got through, and another 19, sorry, my math is terrible, another 16 drones seem to have got through as well. These appear to be targeting energy infrastructure for the most part. We've seen it since Monday, 400 plus aerial projectiles. Russia's retaliation, really, many are seeing this for the humiliation they're enduring from Ukraine's surprise incursion into the Kursk region on the border areas, and it seems too, potentially in the last 24 hours, into the Belgorod region as well, where local Russian officials are asking for evacuations. Zelensky, clearly Ukraine's president, throwing everything he can in this moment into the fight, asking the Biden administration and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, presidential candidates and serving presidents, to approve the use of US-supplied longer-range weapons to hit a specific list of targets inside Russia, as well as already using longer-range Ukrainian drones and missiles to hit oil depots you're seeing there, ammo supplies, even potentially airfields as far north as the Arctic Circle. There was an alert in aviation last week. So much moving here. And I think many analysts are seeing this as Ukraine urgently trying to change the dynamic on the battlefield ahead of a winter where they might find themselves pushed into a negotiating stance, maybe by a change in US president. Phil?
Nick Payton-Walsh, as always, thanks so much. New this morning, Ukraine says its air defenses have destroyed more than a dozen Russian drones flying toward the capital of Kyiv. One Ukrainian official described the overnight attack as, quote, massive, leaving several buildings damaged, and says it's the 3rd aerial raid on the city just this week. Now, we're learning also that Ukraine wants to expand its list of targets on Russian soil. A Russian lawmaker tells CNN that 2 top officials will brief the Biden White House this week in face-to-face meetings. They're going to ask for the U.S. to lift restrictions on the use of long-range American weapons inside Russia. CNN's Oren Lieberman is live for us at the Pentagon. Oren, what more do we know about what these meetings are going to entail?
Phil, the push to use U.S. weapons to hit targets longer range, deeper in Russia, has been a very public and private campaign on the part of Ukraine, stretching from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and on down. It'll be Andriy Yermak, the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, and the defense minister, who will be here for meetings tomorrow with Biden administration officials to present a priority list of targets that they want to hit with long-range U.S. weapons deeper inside of Russia. They need a green light from the White House to be able to do that, and that's their goal here. So far, the Biden administration hasn't changed its position. In fact, U.S. weapons can only be used inside of Russia in a very small area north of Ukraine inside of Russia, and they have used those weapons to that effect. The Kursk offensive has been carried out effectively within that restriction from the U.S. But they say they need to be able to target military assets and high-value targets deeper inside of Russia to change the course of the war. President Volodymyr Zelensky talked about this yesterday.
We continue to insist that their determination now, lifting the restrictions on long-range strikes for Ukraine now, will help us to end the war as soon as possible in a fair way for Ukraine and the world as a whole.
Ukraine has used its medium-range assets, its medium-range weapons to target and carry out cross-border attacks, but Russia has simply moved their high-value assets farther back, farther away from the front line, and they're out of range of Ukraine's current weaponry within the restrictions placed upon them by the U.S. That's why they say it's so important to get these restrictions eased or outright lifted, and that's their goal here.
Oren, you make a great point in the sense that this has been a public campaign that has been going on for a while from top Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky. Do we have any sense right now that because of some reason or another, the U.S. is actually considering changing the restrictions?
So far, the administration and the Pentagon have been clear that the restrictions remain in place. But Phil, you and I have seen this so many times over the course of the war, especially when Ukraine carries out a very public campaign, that the Biden administration will say no, 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 and then suddenly yes. We saw it with Patriots, we saw it with ATACMS, we saw it with Abrams tanks, and that's what Ukraine is hoping for here. That the public and private pressure campaign, that perhaps a comprehensive list of targets of what they want to hit to make that clear to the White House, that will build up enough pressure and convince administration officials that finally they will go from all of those no's to the yes that Ukraine is hoping for.
We'll have to wait and see. Oren Liebermann from the Pentagon, thanks so much. Let's continue this discussion with CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. He's also the White House national security correspondent for the New York Times and the author of the great book, New Cold Wars, China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West. David, I want to start with you where Oren ended, in the sense of there has been month after month an evolution of kind of the administration's analysis of the escalatory risks related to specific requests from Ukraine. Why is this time different? Why would they not consider signing off on lifting restrictions?
It's a great question, Phil, because we're not completely certain where it is that they are in their assessment of Putin's sensitivity to these kinds of escalations. You know, early in the war, you'll remember, because you and I were both covering this at the White House at the time, President Biden was concerned that if the U.S. even provided some long-range weapons just for use inside Ukraine, that could lead Putin to threaten again to use nuclear weapons. As they discovered he wasn't that sensitive to it, they allowed the use of the HIMARS, the ATACMS, they sent tanks, that whole list that you heard from Oren. What's different this time is that the Ukrainians are actually attacking inside Russian territory and holding some Russian territory. And they haven't been able to answer very convincingly, at least in public, two questions. The first is, what's their long-term goal? Do they really plan to hold this land, or are they trying to trade it away for a territory that Russia has invaded inside Ukraine? And second, what's the purpose of striking deep inside Russia with American weapons? It's a pretty, imagine for a moment Vladimir Putin was allowing a similar kind of attack using Russian weapons inside the United States.